Hello Bond fans and welcome to my latest James Bond movie review, where today I review the 15th film in the James Bond film series, which is the first Bond film to star Timothy Dalton as 007. Whoa, The Living Daylights. So, The Living Daylights, released in 1987 and directed once again by Glen. This man was the only director of James Bond in the 80s. Anyway, the plot of The Living Daylights is not exactly basic, it's a little bit more complex, but I'll give you the basic synopsis, so here we go. James Bond is sent to investigate a KGB policy to kill all enemy spies and uncover an arms deal that potentially has major global ramifications. There we go, that is the plot of The Living Daylights. The Living Daylights, well, this is a very different film to what we have seen for the past few films with Roger Moore. This is Timothy Dalton's first Bond film, first of two films. Sadly, Timothy Dalton didn't have a very long stint as 007, but oh well. And what is very noticeable about The Living Daylights is that this is the first Bond movie for quite some time that has gone to sort of a more serious direction, to a more harder-edged direction. They have gone back to the roots of the character, and Timothy Dalton had obviously expressed this in behind-the-scenes making of this film. He wanted to take the character back to his roots and basically humanise him a lot more. Let's face it, as much as I love Roger Moore as James Bond, his portrayal isn't the closest to Fleming's character, for me personally. I feel that Roger Moore's films were a little more lighter and more fun than some of the other installments. This is probably the most serious Bond movie since From Russia with Love, which is the only other one I can think of that has a similar tone to this. Also, the fact of the matter is, with Roger Moore had been in the role for 12 years, and his films have been very similar, so I think it was about time that they tried to update James Bond. And as well, this was the last sort of Cold War spy thriller, really. I mean, that's what The Living Daylights is. It's a Cold War spy thriller, and you know what? I think it's really, really good. I really like The Living Daylights, and I think that this is a great Bond movie. It's a little different, as I've said, but it is, I mean, it has all the essentials there for what you need for a Bond movie. Is it perfect? No, it isn't perfect. Let's start where it starts. Timothy Dalton as James Bond in his first performance. I really like Timothy Dalton as Bond, you know. To begin with, I was a little bit uncertain and a bit dubious about what I thought of Dalton, but I can see why they cast him, because he definitely looks the closest to what Fleming imagined. He's like this tall, dark, handsome stranger who's very cold, and he's a killer. I mean, Timothy Dalton is ruthless as James Bond. My favourite scene in The Living Daylights, which is actually my favourite moment of Timothy Dalton's era entirely, is the scene where he interrogates General Pushkin in the hotel room. That is James Bond. Timothy Dalton is James Bond in that moment. That moment is Oscar-worthy. That is so good in that scene. That is perfect. And you wouldn't see that in a Roger Moore movie. Sorry, Roger Moore fans, sorry. But you wouldn't see that in a Roger Moore film. I mean, Roger Moore definitely had his colder moments, don't get me wrong, but Timothy Dalton's Bond is a harder-edged Bond, and that's what I like about him. However, on the downside, Timothy Dalton unfortunately lacks the charm and the bravado that Roger Moore had with the ladies. That's the only area where I would criticise Timothy Dalton. I think that when it comes to him charming the women, he doesn't have a lot of chemistry with them, and he's a little bit too intense sometimes, and I don't think he's really cut out for that, which is a shame. There are some scenes with Maryam, which are nice scenes, and they're well written, but his delivery can be a little awkward, a little bit too serious. I think he needed to loosen up a bit with those. There is a love scene where they're in a Ferris wheel, Bond and Cara, and she says, "Oh no, we can't. You know, I've only known you 2 days. I mean, all I can think of is how we would be together." And then Bond says, "Don't think, just let it happen." That's not really the way I would have done it, Tim. That's not really the way I would have done it. There's also another moment in a shop where Cara sees a dress And she's like, well, who's going to buy this? And Bond turns to her and goes, let's buy it. Yorgi won't pay for it. And he delivers the line somewhat similar to that, which is it's a bit much. I'm thinking, okay, that's not right. So, but Dalton captures the ruthlessness of the character. He captures the seriousness and the cold killer aspect of the character so well. He really was, and he was dedicated. He did a lot of his own stunts. So I applaud Timothy Dalton for that. And if you were to ask me, do I think Dalton is a precursor to Daniel Craig, I would say yes, he is. In terms of other people in the cast, we have Maryam Darbo, who plays Kara, the central Bond girl. In this film, they kind of changed things a bit because at the time, this came out in the late 80s and there was a bit of an AIDS campaign going on, so they couldn't really show Bond sleazing around with all the women this time. There's only like one other Bond girl, and she's at the very start of the movie, and she's like a cameo role. She's on a boat, and then Bond... It's implied that Bond sleeps with her. Other than that character, Kara is the only Bond girl. She's the only, well, female in this movie. Moneypenny, well, okay, yeah, Moneypenny as well, but in terms of central characters, Kara is the only female. Kara's a very sweet and sympathetic character. She's just innocent, and she's been set up by Koskov, who's, well, supposed to be her boyfriend. She gets involved in this really horrible KGB situation. Bond has to kind of protect her. He feels protective of Kara. Would I say he falls in love with her? I don't think so. I don't think Bond falls in love with Kara. I think she falls for him, but I don't think Bond reciprocates. I think he's charming with her, and he's definitely has affections for her. But I don't think that Bond falls in love with Kara. I think Bond only falls in love with Tracy, Vesper, and, well, I guess I have to say Madeline as well. So those are the only 3 times I think Bond has ever fallen in love in the entire series. However, Maryam Darbo gives a good performance, and there are some great scenes, and she can hold her own. There's moments when she confronts Bond and drugs him like in his drink. She spikes his drink and gets him to tell the truth about what's happened. And also, in a later scene, when they're with the Mujahideen, she rants and complains about him leaving her behind, and she doesn't want him to go, and she genuinely feels affection for him, and she wants to help him. She wants to do it together, and that's a very lovely scene. And when she calls him a horse's ass, and I love Dalton's delivery of the next line, "Are you calling me a horse's ass?" Some very sweet moments. Again, it's just Timothy Dalton's not really... He's not the best with love scenes. He's not the most charming of James Bonds, but he's definitely the most ruthless of the Bonds. Obviously, pre-Daniel Craig. In terms of the villains, I think the villains are actually very poor in this film. I don't think the villains are very good, with the exception of Necros, who is a pretty good henchman. I mean, he's nothing amazing, but he's good. He's the physical presence, and I like that action sequence when he goes into the embassy and fights that agent in the kitchen. That's a very good scene. We'll talk more about the action in a minute, but that is a brilliant scene. As for the other villains, Brad Whitaker, who's the American arms dealer, played by Joe Don Baker, he just doesn't do anything in the film. He's in the film for about 3 scenes, I think, and then he you know, it's not really a spoiler to say that he dies. I think that final confrontation with Whitaker is very anticlimactic. I think Whitaker should have been involved in the actual big fight in Afghanistan, which was in the climax of the movie. It does feel a bit tacked on to have that final scene with Whitaker, so they just literally wrapped it up like that. And he's just a nothing character. He's just underwritten. You know, the acting's fine, but as a character, he's just generic arms dealer. I don't really see what's really menacing about him. He's not a good villain. As for Georgi Koskov, there are times, obviously, when he's trying to put on a facade and be fake to everybody, and he appears to be somewhat jovial, and some of those moments are a little bit cringy. Like, there's even a moment when he kisses Bond in the embassy. He's like, "Oh, James, mwah, mwah." Really? Really? This is the guy who is the villain of this film? Oh, for shame. I mean, Timothy Dalton's face kind of says it all, really, in that scene. Yeah, the villains are a real letdown in this film, which is a real shame. I do like the other supporting characters, like John Rhys-Davies as General Pushkin. He is great in this film. It is interesting to see him because obviously we don't know too well whose side he's actually on, but I think it looks like he obviously is on Bond's side because he's been betrayed by Koskov, who was and Whittaker. So in the end, they joined forces. And as I said, that interrogation scene is a classic scene. It's the best scene of the film. Also, worthy to note, this is John Barry's final James Bond score, which is a real shame in a way, but I can understand John Barry wanting to leave it behind now. I think he'd done enough, I guess, over the years. He'd been scoring Bond for over 20 years, with breaks in between, obviously. But I think John Barry created a beautiful score for this film, a really great score. And I think that it's one of the best scores. It's dramatic, it's beautiful, it's emotional. And the added songs are actually quite good. The Where Has Everybody Gone by the Pretenders. That works quite well, actually, that song. Although the song in the credits, the If There Was a Man, I'm not really too fussed about that. That one's not really that good. I think the score is great, and I think John Barry deserves a round of applause, because, you know, he's without question the best composer of the series, and he brought the sound of Bond to life. Obviously, Monty Norman composed the theme, the James Bond theme, but John Barry did so much for this film series that he has to be commended for that. And I mean, he didn't pass away after this or anything. He actually passed away in 2011, but I think he made a good decision to move on. You know, he didn't want to completely run out of ideas. Good for him. Good for him. The action sequences of this film are fantastic. Because this is a harder-edged movie, they can play up the action a lot more. As I've already mentioned, that kitchen fight scene is one of the best as well. The pre-opening title sequence, when the three agents are scaling the cliff, and then one of them dies, and Bond is pursuing that truck, and Timothy Dalton's fighting the guy in the truck, and then they go over the cliff, and then they're still fighting, and then he pulls the parachute. That sequence is just so phenomenal. It's thrilling. It really is. I also love the final battle in Afghanistan, and also in the plane when Bond and Necros are hanging on the net of the sack of opium, and then they're fighting in like mid-air, and then Bond like cuts the laces on his shoes, and Necros falls to his death. But yeah, no, that was a very thrilling sequence. The car chase as well, I really love. And the Aston Martin V8, which actually is going to reappear in the new film No Time to Die, although now we have to wait till November to actually see what it does. However, the scene itself is very entertaining, and I like the line that Dalton has when he uses the laser on the taxi next to him, and then he says, "Salt corrosion." The story is quite good, although it does get a bit complicated at points. There are times when it is a little hard to follow what's going on. I keep up with it just enough to be entertained. It is a Bond film you have to kind of pay attention to when you watch it. And I've seen this one quite a few times actually, and I do understand a bit more about it now, having rewatched it another time, and it's good to keep rewatching this one. I also like the character of Cameron Shah, who is the leader of the Mujahideen. And the Mujahideen resistance in Afghanistan are good, and they play a part in the finale. Oh, and another action scene I didn't mention was in the prison, when Dalton and Maryam Darbo are about to be shoved into the prison, and that guy, he's saying, "I didn't tell you to get down. I didn't tell you to get up." And then they have a great fight scene as well. I really like that. Caroline Bliss as the new Moneypenny. Obviously, Lois Maxwell would have been far too old to be Moneypenny in this film, especially with Timothy Dalton. As for Caroline Bliss's Moneypenny, I think she is easily the weakest Moneypenny of the series. She's just so dull. She has no personality. She has no chemistry or spark with Dalton whatsoever. And the scene that they have, which is only one brief moment in the film, is very awkward. She basically says, "If you want to drop by, listen to my Barry Manilow collection." You know, Bond just kind of smiles and puts her glasses back on. There's none of that. There's none of that spark, there's none of that magic which, you know, Connery had with Maxwell, or Roger Moore had with Maxwell, not so much Lazenby. It's a real shame that Moneypenny isn't utilised very well, and that the actress playing her isn't doing anything well with the part. Desmond Llewelyn is back as Q for a brief moment, and I think he's got some of the best moments he ever has in this film when he says, "Oh, it's called a ghetto blaster." I love that scene. Also, we have Robert Brown returning as M, and he's good. He's not in it too much, but yeah, he's good. Also, Geoffrey Keane returns as the Minister. Walter Gotell, this is his last film as General Gogol, although he only makes an appearance at the very end of the film. It would have been interesting, actually, if perhaps the Pushkin character was written as Gogol, because obviously if we followed the Roger Moore movies, Gotell was was Gogol in those movies, and it would have been a nice sort of thread of continuity, and it would have been a nice way to kind of wrap up his character, but I don't mind that it's written the way that it is. I think it's fine. The song by a-ha, the Living Daylights song, it's okay. It's certainly not the worst Bond song, but it's kind of just nothing really. I mean, it's catchy, but again, the lyrics just don't make any sense. They're trying to force the words "the living daylights" into the song, and it doesn't work. I mean, it has a good beat to it, but it really doesn't work. The title sequence is quite possibly one of the worst of the series as well, which is a shame. Basically, nearly every shot in this title sequence is a naked woman in front of a headlight, in a champagne glass, or even just like sitting there and the camera moving down. There is a real lack of ideas in the sequence, and it doesn't make for interesting viewing really. And the sequence doesn't relate to the film that much, so I think Maurice Binder is again coming to the end of his time really, and running out of ideas, and he would only do one more title sequence. Overall, I think The Living Daylights is a great Bond movie. It is not perfect, but it is a step in a different direction, which I really appreciate, and I'm glad that they got to do this. And I really like Timothy Dalton's debut film, so I will give this film a 9 out of 10. So that's it, Bond fans. Thank you very much for watching my review of The Living Daylights. Please comment down below, let me know what you think, and stay tuned next time when I review License to Kill, the second and final Timothy Dalton Bond film. Unfortunately so. It wasn't intended to be his last one, but we'll talk more about that next time. Anyway, thank you very much. So long for now.